From rugged glens to remote lochs, over 1.5 million people are drawn to go camping in Scotland every year. In these vast landscapes, where the weather can turn quickly and help can be hours away, some people have vanished without a trace. These are cases that have seemingly defied an easy, obvious explanation and have not been solved. Most campers come and return home safely, but these are the ones who didn't. Let's start near the Bridge of Orchy, located in Argyll and Bute. This is a small village that is a popular stop for hikers and kayakers. Specifically, we are interested in the nearby lochs. Neil Skinner, 71 years old at the time of his disappearance in 2022, lived in Doncaster, a town in South Yorkshire. It was in that town where he raised his family. As a father of 4, he maintained strong bonds with his children, including his daughter, Kate Armitage, who has publicly shared fond memories of her father. Prior to his retirement, Neil worked as a nurse and specifically would help people that had psychological problems. This career choice of his might have stemmed from his own life experiences, as he was diagnosed with Asperger's earlier in his life. So he will have had a good understanding of how to help others with similar diagnoses or problems. Outside of all this, Neil was a man that loved the outdoors, had great skills in the outdoors, and would take frequent wild hiking and camping trips. Neil understood the need for preparation and always took appropriate gear along with supplies. His love for Scotland stemmed from its landscapes, which are ideal for hill walking, and he appreciated the people there who he got along with very well, as he himself was a very outgoing and talkative person. His family stated that, as fit as he was and as good as he was in the outdoors, he was known to have a poor sense of direction. Interestingly enough, Asperger's and a poor sense of direction are linked, which I didn't know until now. This problem was highlighted around 1 year before his disappearance. In 2021, he had a concerning incident on the Isle of Skye, where he became lost for about 5 hours during a hike in which he'd got separated from his friends and colleagues. A mountain rescue team was called out and found him thankfully unharmed and still hiking, trying to make his way back. In 2022, another, more serious incident would occur. The journey began on the 7th of May that year, when Neil travelled to Scotland with 2 of his friends for a hiking and camping trip. They parked at Victoria Bridge and trekked approximately 6 miles to the banks of Loch Dochard, a remote loch in the Scottish Highlands. They set up their base camp there, and they decided that was a good place that they could return to. They slept peacefully that night, and the following day on the 8th, the trio planned to continue to Loch Etive. They woke up and went about their hike, but about 90 minutes into it, Neil started to feel the strain. At 71, Neil knew that he had to look after himself. He began to feel unwell and found the terrain in this particular area to be too challenging. In the years prior, I'm sure that he could have shrugged off the strain and powered through it, but he knew better. He turned back alone and encouraged his friends to continue on without him, which they did. Now, there are varying reports about this next part, but it goes one of 2 ways. The specifics are somewhat lacking here, but the first is that very afternoon, a group of hikers walked by the tent and saw him in close proximity to it. The second is that again, somewhere in close proximity to the campsite, someone matching Neil's description was seen walking. Whether he was relaxing at the tent or was walking in the area near to it, authorities consider midday on the 8th as the last confirmed observation of him. Heavy rain fell that night, which changed his friends' plans. At 6 in the morning on the 9th, they began their journey back to Loch Dochard because the weather was worsening and the rain was becoming even heavier. Before we go any further, if I could just ask you to like the video and hype it, then I would be very grateful. And please consider turning on notifications for the channel and subscribing if you haven't already. Upon arrival, their tent was found neatly arranged, containing all of Neil's possessions, including his phone, wallet, clothes and rucksack. Nearby, his walking poles had been driven into the ground. Interestingly, many people believed that Neil had gone missing while separating from his friends and heading back alone in the first instance, but that does not appear to be the case. At this point, the circumstances become more difficult to explain. Neil was nowhere to be seen, but it had appeared as though he had been preparing some overnight oats on the 8th. When his friends arrived on the 9th, the oats were inside his tent untouched. From my understanding, usually you would leave overnight oats to soak for somewhere around 6 to 8 hours. I have seen some speculation that on that basis, it might suggest that he disappeared on the evening of the 8th, since he'd prepared this food and then obviously had not eaten it in the morning. It appears as though, for one reason or another, he departed without any equipment, aside from his immediate clothing and boots, leaving behind no indication of his direction of travel. He didn't take his walking poles, and it's not understood as to why. Did he intend to just go off on a very short hike? Sunset was around 8:30 PM that night. With the experiences that Neil had, for some reason, if those assumptions are to be believed, that means that there is a chance that he decided to go off alone in either near or total darkness. Others don't believe that to be the case, and instead prefer the version of events in which for one reason or another he woke up early in the morning, perhaps 4 or 5 AM, and left for some reason before eating his breakfast. Either way, it's really not clear what happened. Given that he hadn't touched his breakfast, I can at least see why there are those that believe something happened at night in the darkness. Upon realising that the scene was unusual and out of character, his friends alerted the police to their find. The authorities immediately launched a search and coordinated with mountain rescue teams, specialist dog units, drones, helicopters and diving teams. They really pulled out all of the stops and took the missing persons report seriously. Given that this was a wilderness area, coupled with Neil's age, there was likely a sense of urgency. They scoured both the loch itself and the surrounding terrain. They used underwater sonar scans of the loch and found nothing. They placed searchers and dogs on nearby hills, plantations and paths and found nothing. Despite these efforts, no evidence such as clothing, footprints or abandoned personal items of any kind were discovered. Searchers also pointed out that trying to search such a remote location with its steep slopes, dense vegetation and potential for hidden falls into water or bogs was not exactly easy. These searches yielded absolutely no results whatsoever. It seems that the official position was that, because there were no signs of foul play, nor were there any signs of a voluntary disappearance taking place, it would therefore appear as though some kind of accident took place in the challenging terrain. Given that though, one might assume that the dogs would have found him, or at least have been interested in an area, but that doesn't seem to have happened. By November of 2022, the police re-appealed to the public for information, noting an extensive investigation but having found no trace. There was a large volunteer effort in 2023 with groups like Beneath the Surface organising land and underwater searches around the loch. Independent searchers such as the K9 Outdoors Search Team also conducted repeat expeditions totaling around 40 days by early 2024. I believe that they have also continued into 2025. There is a reason that we've been using search dogs for the last 400 years or so. They're very good at what they do. Yet in this instance, they could not find a scent. While no definitive evidence has emerged as to what happened, I have seen some ideas that have been thrown around. The first posits that Neil may have left his tent early in the morning, around 4 or 5 AM on the 9th of May. He didn't take any equipment because he was only expecting a short outing. The sudden heavy rain that started at around 6 AM soaked him, leading to hypothermia in the dropping temperatures. Perhaps he became disoriented in the boggy, boulder-strewn terrain that he found himself in. Is it possible that he sought shelter in the gullies or under trees but succumbed to exhaustion and cold? The only problem with this is that once a person is suffering from hypothermia, especially as they progress through the stages, they become very slow and groggy, and you wouldn't imagine them to get very far from the point that it became onset. So in that instance, if it is the case at all, one might find it surprising that the search, and specifically the search dog handlers, never found him. The second states that again, early in the morning, Neil might have followed the track toward Glen Kinglass. He might have attempted to cross a lower river ford when it was passable. The rapid rain seen at 6 AM made the river swell and stranded him on the wrong side. It is possible that he followed the river down to a bridge. It was reportedly misty at the time, causing low visibility, and would have been slippery too. Therefore, the idea suggests that he might have fallen into the river and been swept away while trying to cross said bridge. The third states that he didn't go missing either on the night of the 8th or the morning of the 9th. Instead, the idea suggests that after splitting from his friends and reaching the tent, at some point he decided to go for a short hike, met someone and became confused and disoriented. In 2022, Kate stated that she wanted to find a hiker that had passed by the tent on the day that he disappeared. She wondered if her father, while hiking, had come across and conversed with this person, enjoyed talking, and then because of the problems that he had, became disoriented after the conversation, which got him spun around. Then, based on the fact that he has not been found, must have wandered off in the wrong direction and fell into a secluded location that was difficult to find. The fourth states that he might have left voluntarily, though there was no evidence to suggest it, and he left behind all of his belongings, so that seems unlikely. The final hypothesis that I came across was foul play. Some have wondered if after preparing his overnight oats, he was disturbed that very night, and led him to swiftly leaving the area in darkness. There are two problems with this though, and that is that the area of the camp was very remote, and you wouldn't really expect to see another person out there. Secondly, there was no motive. The camp was found in good condition, and nothing was stolen, so what would have been the point? There was no evidence to point in this direction whatsoever, which might suggest that Occam's razor points to some kind of accident with the river. Neil's family members have retraced his steps and held a picnic at the location of the campsite and installed an oak plaque in his honour. They haven't given up hope that they will one day have some closure as to what happened that day in May of 2022. Despite extensive searches and ongoing investigations, what happened to Neil is not understood at this time. I mentioned that in 2021, Neil briefly disappeared on the Isle of Skye before being found, and coincidentally, that is where this next disappearance also took place. Michael Bell was born in 1956 and grew up in Birmingham, England, where he lived with his parents in the Sheldon area. He had a younger brother, and the family was described as being very close-knit and often enjoyed holidays together. Michael himself worked as a storeman at the time in an electrical shop. His family described him as an introvert who preferred quiet activities alone, rather than socialising in groups, but that he was always deeply reliable and always kept in touch with them. It is important to note here that while he did have friends, he kept a small circle, which is probably relatable to a great many of us. I know it is for me. Michael would come to disappear under unusual circumstances in May of 1983 when he was just 27 years old. In the weeks leading up to May of that year, his parents said that he became particularly unhappy at his place of work for one reason or another. I get the sense that he was feeling fed up with work and wanted a break. Seeking this respite, he planned a camping holiday to the Isle of Skye, which is a remote and scenic island in Scotland, known for its rather dramatic landscapes, including rugged mountains and coastal cliffs. If one was wanting to get away for a while and have some solitude, this might be the perfect place to do it. The trip was originally scheduled for later, but he advanced it by a week and left Birmingham with a friend of his. The exact date that Michael and his friend arrived on the island and set up camp isn't specified, though it was likely to have been in the days preceding the 14th of that month. We can be fairly sure of that because on the 14th specifically, tensions arose between Michael and his friend, and they had a heated row while at the campsite, though it is not clear about what. Feeling thoroughly frustrated and eager to leave, Michael abandoned the camp rather abruptly, leaving behind all his luggage and personal belongings, which was a detail that later puzzled the police. They just could not understand why he had chosen to do that. This was odd behaviour and uncharacteristic of Michael, as it suggested a kind of haste alongside the already unplanned departure. In any case, now alone, he made his way southward through the Scottish highlands. Somehow, somewhere, he managed to reach a small village known as Dalwhinnie, about 100 miles southeast of Skye on the Scottish mainland. Somewhere alongside a remote road in close proximity to the village, he came across a public phone box, where he placed a call to his parents who were still back in Birmingham. During the conversation to his father, he explained the fallout with his friend and expressed his desire to return home, and assured them he would arrive the next day. He expressed his intention to make his own way back. He told them that he planned to hitchhike and take public transport where possible. The call then ended suddenly. The line simply cut mid-sentence, leaving his parents concerned, though they thought that it was a technical issue. Michael didn't call back. At this point, I do just want to say that in these kinds of disappearances, sometimes there is this odd moment where you're just thinking, what in the world happened? This is not the first time I have covered a missing person in which the individual in question vanished in the middle of a phone call. In fact, this has happened a number of times. I'll leave a link in the top right now to a video I made about two individuals, one from the UK, that vanished during a phone call. I'll also leave that link in the description, alongside another link to my video on Brandon Swanson, who also went missing mid-phone call in America. Anyway, there are no recordings or transcripts of the call in the public records, and the details come primarily from family recollections shared in the media. That call was the very last time that he was ever heard from. Following the call, Michael did not arrive home as promised, which prompted his family to call the authorities. Police from Birmingham collaborated with Scottish police and they began a joint effort investigation, though of course the Scottish police took the lead. Searches focused on the Dalwhinnie area but also on the Isle of Skye in case he'd returned. His abandoned belongings at the campsite were recovered, but there was no sign of such a return. Bank records showed that they had been untouched after the 14th. This might suggest that something literally happened right there and then during the call, or after he left the public phone, and on the same day. Initial ideas of what happened considered the possibility of a mishap in the rugged terrain. After all, he was in a remote area alone. Both Skye and the highlands feature treacherous cliffs, rivers, and unpredictable weather, where hikers, especially those without much experience, could become disoriented and injured if not careful. While attempting to navigate towards home, all kinds of different things could have gone wrong. However, it is important to say that the ground searches of the surrounding areas found no evidence of his presence at all. Throughout the 80s and 90s, the case remained open and bizarrely never managed to find any leads at all. There were some reported sightings over the years, but none of them were particularly convincing. By the early 2000s, the family still continued the fight for answers and were still spreading awareness. In 2005, Michael's father, Kenneth, organised a sponsored walk to raise funds for the National Persons Helpline. There was another attempt in 2006 in which a picture of Michael was placed on lorries travelling across England urging tips to that helpline, though none came in. Aside from an accident, other ideas as to what happened ranged from wanting to start a new life elsewhere to foul play. A purposeful disappearance seems very unlikely in this instance because he was very close to his parents, and it doesn't seem all that probable that he would ring them to give them false hope of his return, only to then go off somewhere else. Again, there was also no bank activity whatsoever after the 14th, so there's really no evidence of that being the case. As for foul play, there has been plenty of speculations about this. I've seen people consider whether the argument with his friend led to this, in that maybe the friend followed him all the way and something happened between them. That also seems incredibly unlikely though, because it looks like Michael had used a mixture of hitchhiking and public transport to end up where he did at Dalwhinnie, alone. Something that might be more likely than that, given the abrupt ending to the phone call, was that he wasn't alone. Is it possible that in this remote location, someone caught him by surprise and then proceeded to remove him from the area? Or perhaps the phone ending abruptly was just a technical problem, and then afterwards, while trying to hitchhike, something untoward happened. It's really not clear at all. There's no hard evidence that points towards this, though I'm not sure exactly what you could expect to find if it happened suddenly. Despite the lack of evidence, there does seem to be a large number of people in favour of foul play, and in fairness, I can see why one might lean in that direction. Ultimately though, there is no real ending or closure to Michael's disappearance. All we have is the fact that mid-sentence, during a phone call, he quite literally just vanished and nobody has ever found a trace of him, or what happened to him, despite all these years passing since. This now brings us to the final disappearance in Scotland that I wanted to talk about today. This wasn't a camper though, and it's a disappearance I've discussed briefly on the channel before, though I feel that I can do it more justice here. This disappearance we're about to discuss is one of the more unusual ones, and it's older. Ben Har, situated near Harthill in the parish of Shotts, was a modest mining village established around coal and ironstone extraction. By the late 1890s, companies like the Ben Har Coal Company operated multiple pits, employing hundreds of men in gruelling underground work. The winters were harsh, with snow and freezing cold temperatures, obviously exacerbating risks for the miners who often walked long distances between home and work. Donald McFarlane was born in 1836 and was a lifelong resident of this area, and ended up living in West Ben Har Rose, which was a series of terraced housing built for miners and their families. As a seasoned coal miner, he would have been familiar with the local landscape, including the Almond Water, which was a tributary river prone to flooding and icing over the winter months. Not much is known about his early life, or his life in general, though we do know that he was a hard worker and well respected in the community. Genealogical records also suggest that he was married, with family ties including his brother-in-law, Robert Halbert. Donald was noticed as missing on Sunday the 30th of December 1890. It's not clear with the Ben Har Coal Company specifically, but workers back then didn't really get breaks the way that we get them today, mostly only getting Sundays off and national holidays. So, based on some reports, it is likely that he had been delving into the depths of the earth with the rest of his crew the day before. I say that he was noticed missing on the 30th because it's not completely clear when he actually disappeared. Some believe that during the workday on the 29th, Donald had seemingly decided to leave at some point, though nobody realised it at the time. Either way, when nobody had heard from him, searches began on the 30th, focusing on nearby paths, colliery sites and nearby outbuildings. People were concerned that he'd had an accident, such as falling into an abandoned pit or going for a walk and getting lost or disoriented in the snow. The landscape of Ben Har consisted of craggy terrain, and the hidden crevices offered countless places for a man to fall and vanish accidentally. Like every other search effort we've discussed today, all of them ended in failure and did not offer a trace of Donald, nor provide a direction of travel. By the following morning, the search had been expanded. Friends, relatives and miners suspended their operations and scoured Ben Har. Again, no trace was found. The community was accustomed to accidents involving mining in the pits, and they began to wonder if something happened to him while extracting coal. Though had that have been the case, it would have likely been noticed as Donald was a part of a crew. The story takes an incredibly strange turn with the involvement of his brother-in-law, Robert, so let's get bizarre. Robert was 66 years old at this time, and also from Ben Har. One night, according to him, he'd fallen asleep and vividly saw Donald in a particular part of the Almond Water, described as being some miles away from Ben Har. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the exact place being referred to, but I'd imagine that the River Almond must snake its way towards West Ben Har somewhere, potentially from the southeast. Anyway, Robert shared this information with neighbours, who I'm sure probably had mixed reactions to it. There were those that took it seriously, clearly, but I'd imagine that there were those that thought the whole notion was nuts. In any case, influenced by his good standing, and given that everything so far had failed, a search was put together to walk along the river. Guided only by what Robert claimed to have seen, they apparently found footprints of the missing man in the snow. They followed the footprints, and in a shallow section of the river, in water about 3 feet deep, oddly, Donald was standing upright with ice frozen solid around him. Dr. Miller, a physician from nearby Hart Hill, examined the body and said that there were no signs of injury or struggle, and that he passed away as a result of hypothermia. This was interesting for a number of reasons. The people who came across him in the first place wondered if he'd fallen in, became confused because of the cold, and then desperately tried to get out. Dr. Miller, on the other hand, had pointed out that there was no such struggle nor injury. Also, nobody had seen him leave, and no one had any ideas as to what even happened to him. Some hailed Robert and said that he had amazing abilities, and others speculated and wondered if Robert had something to do with it in the first place. Or at least knew about this in advance, since he somehow seemed to know where Donald would be. I suppose those people were either suggesting foul play at the hands of Robert, or that Donald planned to disappear and told Robert beforehand, ensuring he'd be found and his family would have closure. Ultimately though, while opinions were all over the place in the wake of Donald's discovery, because of the scene, it was not investigated as being suspicious. There was limited record keeping back then, and exact records don't exist, but it's thought that he was likely buried in a local kirkyard, possibly in Shotts or Hart Hill. But in the end, it's not really known what happened to him, and on that uncertain note, I suppose that brings us to the end of this. There is another disappearance that I've been looking into and writing about, so hopefully I'll be able to have that ready for next week. If there's a specific disappearance that you'd like me to cover, then do let me know in the comments and I'll look into it. With that, please do remember to subscribe and turn on notifications for the channel, and also to like the video and hype it if you can. I'd appreciate that very much. Or a dislike if you disliked it. I'm happy to hear your honest opinion either way. I'd just like to thank you for watching, and a really big thank you to the patrons who've been running around on the screen. Have a great week and be safe all. Peace.